So basically, what I'll be primarily talking about today is ingesting healthcare open data into Azure and Power BI. It's a side project I've been thinking about for a very long time and just kind of got going on it, and I plan to keep building on it and doing some more things with it. Just a little bit of background on kind of what my background is. I've been in Microsoft's healthcare and life sciences division since 2017. I've been with Microsoft since 2016. In 2017, they decided to have a dedicated health and life sciences vertical. Kind of, I came on when Satya was CEO. Previous to that, it was a different kind of company where they'd come in and sell boxes of licenses and then walk away. And we're trying to get, it's still a work in progress, but we're working towards kind of having industry expertise where people focus on specific industries, so that all of my meetings during the day are primarily with different providers, opposed to jumping from manufacturing to advertising to something else throughout the day, and also so that our kind of product life cycles are more in tune with the needs of our customers by doing that. I primarily work with Power BI and some Azure data tools, hence the topic today. And I cover 100 plus enterprise healthcare customers across the US. I worked in consulting for a little over 10 years before coming to Microsoft. Did a lot with business intelligence, primarily on the Microsoft stack. That's just kind of where I landed, getting my job experience. A lot of work with data warehousing. Also spent some time doing some advanced analytics and machine learning and those sorts of things. So kind of what is this Powerpop Health, and why is there kind of interest to stay on the meeting today? It's basically, and this is kind of the mission statement I'm trying to put together, which is it's a collection of content intended to simplify the process of ingesting and prepping healthcare open data for analytics, business intelligence, and more. I want to make it easy for people to ingest, transform, and format healthcare open data, specifically healthcare open data, because I don't want to just open it up to everything, because I just don't have the bandwidth to go there, and you kind of lose focus at that point. So that people can do more with it and spend less time kind of lifting and shifting the data, and more time doing analytics and insights and those sorts of things. And I'll kind of talk to that too here with kind of what the origins were. So back in 2010, I was with a consulting company where I had a biology undergraduate degree. I came from a healthcare background and kind of found my way into business intelligence. And they asked me to help them put a healthcare practice together. And at the time, it was almost impossible to find demo data. And if you make up fake data in healthcare, it looks fake. I mean, getting the length of stay to look right, and complications and things like that, it just really doesn't work, or it's really hard to make it work. So I went looking for data, and it kind of put me on this path of realizing there's all this public data out there that's underutilized. So I ended up building a solution using what's called HCUP data, which is data that hospitals report to the government. It's not really open data. You can get it publicly, but there's some terms and conditions on how you can use it and reuse it, things like that. But it really kind of opened up my eyes to what you can do with that data. There was also a project I was on at the local VA in Minneapolis, where they have an EMR, which is called, I don't know if they're using it anymore or not. I haven't talked to anybody from there in a long time, called Vista, which I think is similar to some of the other ER systems, more of a government system. And basically, we're taking, the nightly extract would come out of Vista. We pulled it into SQL Server, put it into SQL Server 2005, and then we were using a tool called ProClarity to slice and dice it. And I said, wow, this is really amazing stuff. Like, we're able to look at things like, whether it's glucose levels or A1C scores, looking at even some of the surgical things. We were specifically looking at things that pertain to HEDIS, and at the time it was called JCO. It's now Joint Commission metrics. But there were a lot of things that weren't there, but there were other things where you kind of said, hey, if we could make this usable, you could really improve the quality of care for people out there, and provide some real value for these organizations. And this is something I'm personally very passionate about, is that I think they say it takes like $1 billion to bring a new medication to market. Well, I think for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, you can do things with your data that are going to save lives and improve quality of care. And those types of initiatives, I think you get a lot of return on your investment, and you might not be inventing something brand new, but you're just helping to improve quality and improve patients' lives. And that benefits everything from the bottom line of the company to the patients who are coming to your system. So 2013, I was looking into some options for making open data easier to use. And at the time, it was really hard to do something that was reusable outside of like SQL Server. There really wasn't a way to put something out there on GitHub that anybody could use, and there's not a huge upfront cost to get started. Then in 2017, when I came to Microsoft, Microsoft didn't have any healthcare demos. Literally, I'm out there doing demos, and it's like red and green bicycles, and I'm talking to healthcare companies. I said, we gotta do something about this. So that's when I started pulling in some data from CMS and the FDA and some other places to do some demos. And it was really for demo purposes at the time. But then kind of over time, some of them said, hey, can you get me a copy of that? Because we actually want to do something with it. Population health has been a hot topic for quite a while now, but as more of our customers are moving to the cloud, a lot of them are kind of different customers are at different kind of maturation levels with their pop health work. Some are way ahead of anything that I'd even understand what they're beginning to do. But it seems like a lot of them are reinventing the wheel, where they're going after the same data sources, they're trying to do the same things, and there might be some opportunities to kind of consolidate and take the kind of rinse, wash, repeat part of the process and make it reusable so they can have their data scientists doing the science instead of doing ETL. So I kind of started planning it in 2020, and I put a lot of thought into it in that, it's really not my place to be trying to get insights out of this data. I'm like a technical guy who works for Microsoft, but I do know how to lift and shift data, how to, clean it and model it and get it ready to use. So that's where I said, I'll kind of focus on that. That way I'm not coming in and saying, oh, look what I found in the CMS data. It's more about, here's how you get the CMS data into your system so you can go have your data scientists find some value from that data. Kind of what's there in the first cut versus what I'm planning long term. So for starters, I pulled in the things I've been working on for really my job and other things and just the learning process. So, things from the CDC and CMS, the FDA, and then basically use Data Factory to set up a repeatable ETL package that's easy to deploy using an ARM template that drops the raw data into a data lake. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that raw data was available is sometimes you'll get data scientists who say, I don't want you to do anything to that data. I want the raw data as it exists at the source, so that if I write a white paper, I can detail every single line of code of what happened to that data. So they have that raw data level layer at the data lake. But then also for the people who want to do more BI and analytics, it's let's put it into a format where it's easy to ingest. In the first phase, I basically just pulled it into Power BI data flows and Power Query. It's because a lot of it I built already, and it's really easy to do, and it gets the data into a format where people can start using it right away. And then longer term, I want to add an Azure SQL database layer so that you can have a relational database. And then for some of the larger data sets, potentially Azure Synapse, so that it can also open it up to some of the other things you can do with Azure Synapse Analytics. Then on the Power BI side, I'm going to add some tabular models. For those of you who aren't from a Microsoft background, a tabular model is a it's what used to be a SQL Server analysis services cube. Originally they were cubes, multidimensional models. They replaced that with what's called the tabular model or the tabular cube. Now that's part of Power BI and part of the licensing structure. So it's actually Azure analysis services under the hood, and then also maybe some reports so people can just get started and get an idea of how to work with this data. And likewise, by having it in these different layers, if you work for somebody who maybe uses Tableau or Click, you could just port it to the Azure SQL DB layer and then use a different reporting tool on top of it. So I'm trying to make it kind of modular, where it's not going to lock people into, oh, you have to use 100% Microsoft stack. They can be a little flexible that way. Any questions so far? Okay. So right now, this is on the GitHub site too, but this is kind of what I started with. I just had to pick a cut of data to kind of launch things with. In the middle there, where I've got kind of a highlight around the one box, there was something that I'd been working on before this with one of my counterparts from the Azure team, where a really large customer came to us and said, we're considering using Azure Synapse with Power BI, but we want to have, one, a demo where we can just deploy it. Two, we want it to be real healthcare data. And three, we want Microsoft to give it to us so we can just go evaluate it and test it, and then also use it for training processes. And I'll quickly go show that just for starters, because that was kind of the impetus for moving ahead with doing this Powerpop Health initiative. And so it's actually at this link here, and I can give this to you as a follow-up if you're interested. But Kunal is a colleague of mine from California, and he's got some skills that kind of go beyond what I have. So we kind of teamed up to make this happen. And basically what we built here was a single script using an ARM template. And he's got some instructions here on how to deploy it, where if you were to go to Azure and just run the Cloud Shell right here, you could, and I won't do it right now because this isn't really even the topic today. You can run these scripts and it'll actually deploy a solution that if I were to go show it to you, and it deploys everything in less than an hour. So it'll deploy the data factory, which goes and gets the data from CMS, and it's 6 years of Medicare Part D data, which I think is, it's either 150 or 200 million rows of data with the 6 years. Then it takes that data and it kind of shapes it into a relational model. It deploys an instance of Azure Synapse and it ports the data into Synapse. And then there's also a Power BI template you can plop right on top of it so that everything just kind of works. There's also some videos at the bottom of the page that'll kind of walk you through this. And I think this is valuable for a couple different reasons. One is if you just want to learn about the tools, it's a lot easier to take something that's working and kind of open it up and see how all the widgets are pieced together and figure it out, rather than trying to build something from scratch. Two, it is real CMS data, so there might be some utility there for people who are looking to do something with that data. And then three, we're going to keep it updated over time so that kind of as the features change in these different tools, we can make that parts of the new version of the script. So I know Kunal and I think some data scientists are trying to do some AI stuff on top of the data, but I'm not really tied into that part of the project. But you can see here, for example, that this is over in 150 to 200 million rows really isn't Synapse sized. It's more Azure SQL database sized, but it was the biggest database we could find that was healthcare to kind of meet the request of that customer. But you can, hover over like a specific, state and get the actual drugs that are being prescribed there. What was the cost, the claim count? It drills all the way down to specific physicians and kind of what they're prescribing. Using some of the query caching technologies, the query performance is really good. So we're running on a pretty large database here, and you can see that I click on hematology or neurology, and things run pretty fast. So if there's any interest in exploring that, I can get you some more information. But then I said, hey, I've got all these packages built already for CMS data. So I might as well just use it for that other project that I've been kind of noodling on for a while here. So I'm going to go back to the Powerpop Health framework. So you'll see, actually, I'm going to move back to my slide deck. And so what I did is I created a separate ARM script for kind of each of these different sets of data. And then I tried to make it so it's really easy for somebody to deploy. So one of the things we ran into with this Synapse demo was when people were using the Cloud Shell version down here, sometimes they'd try to do it using PowerShell or something like that. The original version was PowerShell, and people were running into all kinds of problems. Personally, I hate PowerShell because you have to have the right version. You have to know PowerShell. People who know it, they love it, but it's people who don't know it, it can be a barrier to adoption. So one of the things I wanted to do for the Powerpop Health framework was get rid of PowerShell so that somebody who's a business user who doesn't write code could use this as a way to start learning, right? And kind of the idea that once you deploy something, then it'll be easier to go learn the code and it'll be easier to kind of get started. So if I were to go into, for example, I'll go into the geography data folder, and you'll see here that there's an ARM template. And this ARM template is something that you can just cut and paste to go deploy it. So if I were to, before I do that, I'm gonna show one other thing here. So down at the bottom of the first page, I put a link to where you can deploy an ARM template in Azure. So if I go ahead and copy that link, and then I put it right here, and wait for that to open up. It should take me to, and I've got a dog barking in the background. If anybody hears it or if it interferes with anything, just let me know. So go into that.
Adds to the presentation.
makes it more personal. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so if I go to that link, it takes me to where I can build your own template in the editor. I'm going to go back here, and I'll go into, let's go deploy the geography data script. And so I made it so rather than using, PowerShell or Cloud Shell, you can just copy what's here, go to custom deployment, build your own template in the editor, and control all, or actually control here and control V. And then when I go to save, it says, okay, what resource group do you want to put this in? I use the Big Adventure Works for a lot of demos. What's the data factory name? So you'll see here that I've already added a data factory, which is, I added videos on how to do every one of those things. So if you've never used Azure before, there's a video on how to add a data factory to a resource group. So you put your data factory name. So in this case, it would be test lake delete. All right, and then there's a key that you can go get for your data lake. So if I were to go back here to Big Adventure Works, and then I have a data lake here, test lake delete. There's a button here where you can go get the access keys. I won't show that right now just because then you'd have the keys to my data lake. But all you do is paste that in here. And then the name of your data lake, which is test lake delete, would go right here. And then you hit review and create, and it'll take the code for that data factory package, and it'll put it into your data factory. So if I go back to here, so if I were to run that, I won't take the time to run it right now, but if I were to hit review and create and then hit deploy, it would deploy it to my data factory. And when you come into the data factory, if I go to author and monitor, you'll see that there's been a few different scripts which have been deployed to this one. And we'll just wait for that to open. And so that script, when you run it, it's going to drop things in here so you don't have to do anything. If I were to open up pipelines, I think I've run all the scripts into this one as I was just kind of testing things. But you'll see there's one here for get the FIPS file. And if I click on that, and if I were to trigger it, then it's going to basically go to the data set for the FIPS source. So if I were to click on this and all of this gets deployed, you don't have to configure anything. It'll take the FIPS source and it'll drop it into what's called the FIPS raw file in the data lake. And the FIPS source is the URL from, I actually went to the FCC to get a list of FIPS codes. I don't know if that's the best place. I looked at a bunch of different sources and they all had their pros and cons, but this one seemed to line up the best with some of the other data that I was working with. So that was just a judgment call I made on where to get those FIPS codes. But basically it'll go get the data and then it'll just drop it into your data lake for you. So if I were to go back to, let me go back to my data lake. So I'll stay in my demo resource group. And here's the data lake. And if I then go to blob service, I've got my Powerpop Health. And then you'd have the FIPS data sitting in a folder here. So if you're a data scientist who wants that raw file, you can just go get the raw data and work directly from that data lake. And you don't have to use anything else from Microsoft at that point. You've got that data up in the cloud in a data lake. And if you want to, you could schedule that data factory package to run on a cadence. So something like this probably only changes every few years when they change county boundaries or something like that, or county designations or whatever it is they're doing. But other things might change frequently, and then you can just kind of schedule that data factory package to run on a cadence. Then what's also here, if we go back to the GitHub framework, the rest of these, and I've been thinking about kind of a good way to name them a little bit differently so you know what they are, but these are just scripts to get them into Power BI and to make it easy to ingest them into Power BI. So for example, if I just wanted to add, so this one is FIPS states, and this one is FIPS states and counties, right? And both of those are on the same document that I'm getting from the FCC. And then I use Power Query or data flows, which is the cloud version of Power Query, to basically parse those out and turn them into two separate tables. So if I were to just go to this FIPS states, this is just, it's called mQuery. Again, you don't have to know what it is. You don't have to know how to read it. You can just cut and paste it and then reuse it. So if I were to go back to my FIPS states and counties data flow up in the cloud, I'm going to open that up and go ahead and go to the editor view. Data flows it's kind of it's a self-service ETL tool that's in the cloud, and it's part of Power BI. It's part of the Power BI licensing construct. It's not going to replace something like a data factory or SSIS or Informatica, but it's really easy to use, and it's intended to be low code, no code. So you can get a lot of things like reference tables and things like that up into the cloud. So you can see here that if I were to go to advanced editor, I just pasted that script into a data flow, then you hit OK. Well, one other caveat there is in the script, it says your data lake, and you have to put the name of your data lake here. So there's a couple places, and I have a video that shows you how to do that. You just replace the generic name with the name of whatever you named your data lake, which would be over here where your data is sitting. For me, it's Powerpop Health. And then when you hit OK, it'll just go get that data and turn it into a data flow. And in this instance, let's see here. There we go. So you can see that I went to the source. I went through these different ETL stages where, you can see there was a lot of kind of junk text, not really junk, it's descriptive from the FCC, but I was able to then kind of remove those rows, clean up the data. And then when I go ahead and save everything, you've got your FIPS code with your state name and your state key. So if I were to go back to Power BI desktop, I can then take that file and I can share it with anybody in the whole company. Not really a file, the data flow. It's basically a cache of data sitting in the cloud. So then somebody could say, hey, I want to add it to this report. I could go to get data, data flows, and then it's also identity driven. So you can control who has access to it and who doesn't. But I could then go and get that data from Powerpop Health and basically say FIP states and counties, and I can pull in, it's going to give me a browse, either just the states, if I wanted the states table, or if I had county level data, I could make that available to the end users. And I won't pull it in here and wait for that to update. But if I did, then I could just snap it right into this data model, and it could be used to filter the other data. Also, if I was doing just regular Power Query within Power BI, so a data flow is intended to take a query like that and share it with a large number of people and have it run on a schedule and be cached up in the cloud. So it's kind of reusing a single table. And I do see this occasionally with customers where they're using a source, like a relational source like SQL or Oracle. Sometimes they'll even do it over like their Clarity instance to reduce some of the stress on their Clarity database, as they'll say, okay, I'm just going to pull a couple of reference tables up into data flows so people don't have to keep querying that same table again and again and again. They can make it reusable and repeatable. But if you do just want to do it once, you could also just add it right inside a Power BI desktop, and it'll become a part of that individual data set for that individual report. So I could just go to new source, blank query, I could paste that code in, and it'll pull it in as part of this individual report. So if you're not familiar with Power BI, that might be a little bit confusing, but it's basically taking the same query and it's saying, do I want to use this query just one time in this one report? Or do I want to put it up in the cloud and share it with a large number of people so that I only have to send a query against that table in Clarity once, and then I can share it. This isn't really Clarity, obviously, this is completely different. But if you were using it for Clarity, you could do that with the table from Clarity and then reshare it with a bunch of people without having to send multiple queries back to the source. And in this case, if you're doing Pop Health with a large group, whatever tables you do decide to use as your reference tables, you could make sure everybody's using the single source of truth and share it with a bunch of people, and maybe save some money by reducing the amount of traffic that they're sending, maybe to an on-prem source or something like that. So that's kind of how it works. And obviously it's still a work in progress as I add scripts for a SQL server and for Synapse and things like that. It's going to kind of grow and mature. But you'll see here in the README section that it kind of walks through kind of what kind of different types of content are here, where I'm trying to compartmentalize it. So, it's not just a Power BI solution. You can use it in different tools. And then also all the instructions are down here at the bottom. So how do you deploy an Azure Data Lake? How do you deploy Data Factory? So basically, how do you deploy that ARM template, and then the link to actually deploy it? And then also the M queries within Power BI that you can use in either Power BI and data flows. And if I go to my Azure account here, I just go to cost management and billing, I will tell you a caveat that if you start using Synapse, it can get pretty expensive quickly. But as long as I keep my Synapse instance off or only turn it on when I'm doing development work, I mean, we're halfway through the month and I'll be less than $200 for the month. And I think most of our customers, a user can get a credit for training and learning of like 150 or $200 a month, something like that with Azure. So it's not running up a huge bill either, especially if you're just using the data factory and the data lake parts. Those are really low cost. It's when you get to the high compute stuff like Synapse that the bill starts to go up. Also with Power BI, if you don't have a Power BI license, you can download Power BI Desktop for free, and then you don't have to, and it's totally free. So you can do everything I'm building right now, you can do right in Power BI Desktop without having to have a license. It would just be the data flows in the cloud would need a license, Or if you want to share it with somebody else in the cloud, then you need a license. But it's one of the reasons I think they've kind of nailed it with the licensing structure on Power BI is they've set it up so that you can learn the tool, do a proof of concept, and evaluate how much you're going to use before you have to buy anything. So there's not like this huge upfront commitment, and then you're worried about, are we going to get value out of that purchase? You can kind of buy as you go. But that's my day job, so I'll stay away from that. I'm going to go ahead and move back to the slides here real quick. So I can show some more demos if anybody wants to see anything specific. But just kind of to close out here, so kind of what's next, I want to add some more data sources and keep growing this thing out. I've wanted to do it a long time. You know, I've been working with open data 10 years now, so I might as well, you know, get moving. And I've been getting some feedback on some different things people would like to see from, there's a lot more data from CMS I could add, from AHRQ, from the FDA. Department of Agriculture has some interesting data, CDC, and then maybe other sources too, kind of depending on the type of feedback I get. I'm also going to be meeting, I'm not a GitHub expert. This has kind of been starting with that Synapse demo, the first time I've really done a lot in GitHub. So I'm going to be meeting with some GitHub experts I work with to try to come up with a framework so that this thing doesn't kind of spin out of control. Because I've had a couple people ask me to co-contribute, and I definitely want to do that, but I don't want to have it detract from my day job. I want it to be kind of easy to manage. Everybody can do their own thing, and then when we validate it works, we can kind of roll it back in. So I got to figure out how to make that work. And then also adding the components for Azure SQL DB, the Power BI data sets, those tabular models, and also the Power BI reports. So I guess hopefully I didn't put everybody to sleep. Any questions? Anything anybody would like to see, or any feedback?
I can certainly. Hi, Greg. This is Garrett. I can certainly say something. There was a bit of a light bulb moment. I've seen the data flows before, but I hadn't really ever captured the use case before, and it seems very similar to like the Click has a QVD layer, Tableau has those like working traditional extract structures, but the ability to share it at a layer downstream from that top level, a bit of light bulb moment. So thanks for that. I was going to kind of ask if, you know, you said you've worked or you've seen and worked with a couple of SDOH groups, and you know, see where like some people are light years ahead. Do you have any, like, I don't know, killer apps or great use cases of where they're actually mixing the data and finding something interesting and actionable?
Yeah, so there's actually a presentation I can put a link to that I'll send you. I'll send after the. I just don't know where the link is right now, but Integris Health did a presentation at the Business Applications Summit a week or two ago, and kind of their use case is there's a lot of awesome stuff they can do right in Epic. And if you can do it in Epic, do it in Epic. I mean, that's they own it. That's where it should be done. But then they also had all these peripheral systems where they were getting data from other places. They were getting data from, I think it was like ServiceNow and their CRM, and they're doing a lot with Pop Health. And so what they did is they ported the data they needed from Clarity up to Azure, and then they were able to use Data Factory to kind of get it. I think they used Data Factory along with Databricks and some other things. I don't know everything they did, in order to kind of prep it for the reporting layer. And then it was huge data volumes. So then they used Synapse as their compute layer. And then they were actually using, you know, Power BI on top of Synapse in order to expose it to the end users. So I can send that link, but for them, it was as far as the actual use cases, they dive into it a little bit, but a lot of it was kind of taking. You'll have to watch the video to get into it. So it's really the use case, I think, was they wanted to bring in data from other places, mix it with their EMR data, and then do some reporting on it. Some other things I've seen are like access. There was another customer where they were doing something around access to quality food and food deserts, and they were using external data to do some of that work. And then also some of the, I personally work with mostly providers, but some of my counterparts also work with like pharma, and they're very interested in things like, I think it was the FDA adverse events reporting and things like that, where they're pulling that in. So I don't know if that's necessarily pop health, but it's still kind of open data healthcare, so to speak.
Sure, very cool. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and I'm learning I'm looking to learn more about this too as I go. So it's kind of, I'd like to make it kind of the area I had with my career is to not just, you know, kind of be the BI guy, but to kind of get more into healthcare BI and pop health and that kind of thing. All right. Any other questions? Anything anybody would like to see, or any just feedback on things that could be better?
Well, this is Adam Hardy. I also appreciate your time. I'm actually up in Green Bay, and I am not really a technology person. I'm the founder of a social impact and technology startup up here in Green Bay that has some aspirations towards pop health and that kind of integration. This is really, really interesting. My goal is to kind of bring this back to our team and share and learn, and we're looking forward to watching the video. So number one, I just want to thank you for your time and your expertise and your interest in all this. I think this is incredibly cool stuff. My other question is kind of a piggyback of what I think was Garrett had said. We're all about trying to get data in the hands of practitioners, actionable data that can, help people make changes in people's lives, as well as more broad-based, dashboarding. Have you worked at all in trying to pipe data to individual practitioners? It could be a school nurse. It could be actually within a clinic setting, someone in that environment. So you can kind of take this data and shuttle it and attach it to individual actual records. And then if you thought about that, how are you working on the HIPAA side of that?
Yep. So I can add a few things there. So personally, I don't do the hands-on work with customers anymore. I used to as a consultant, but I'm generally there. So when customers have questions where they've hit a blocker or they think they've found a limitation in the product, that's where I come in and I either help them clear that hurdle, or I go to the product group and say, hey, you really got to fix this because it's not working the way it's supposed to. So as far as actual implementation, I don't always get as involved with that anymore. I have seen, so I haven't seen any solutions that I've actually seen where they're providing pop health data to the providers or the end users. I have seen solutions where they're giving data to physicians or nurses or people like that, where you have to have row level security. You have to, have kind of strict, everything in place to be HIPAA compliant. And you can do that with this solution stack. There's obviously many different solution stacks you can choose from to accomplish that goal. So usually what I see is more EMR data where they have kind of large scale reporting. I can give you an example of one where I helped them do a proof of concept. It was a large conglomerate where they had purchased many hospitals, and some were on Epic, some were on other EMRs, and they were bringing all the data together in a data warehouse, and then they were looking at different vendor solutions of, I think it was 3 billion rows of data for a single solution, where they wanted to have the data be aggregated for the executives, but then individual providers, when they looked at the data, they would only see the data they're supposed to see. And that even could have some complexity to it. So there might be an example where, let's just hypothetically say you're an oncologist. When you log in, you might see the average length, maybe not length of stay, but maybe you might see some sort of metric that's related to your department, and you can compare your own metric to your department. But then when you drill the detail, if it goes below a certain number of patients, you're only allowed to see your patients, so that there's not the ability for you to identify somebody else's patient, so to speak. And there's ways to do that, and there's architectures you can build in to make that happen. Most of these open data kind of public sources do have in the licensing terms that you should not be using the data to try to re-identify people. So I've read there's some examples where data was put out in the public, and data scientists were able to go out and kind of munge together different public data along with some other data and figure out who the people were in the data. It's called re-identification, which is a huge risk and a major, that would be a major HIPAA violation if somebody did that.
Absolutely.
So I think the way that people use this data has to be done responsibly, and you should make sure you read the licensing terms before you use any of these sources. But I actually reached out to a couple of them ahead of time, and the curators for the CMS data sets, they said, hey, this data is out there in the public arena. As long as you follow the licensing terms, you're good to go, basically.
Okay, that's appreciate your response. It's a great response. Appreciate it.
But yes, and I think this is also kind of a textbook use case for when a third-party data tool would be applicable, is when you want to bring in data from other places that maybe aren't part of the data that's available in the EMR system. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that, or if they.
Yeah, I can definitely chime in on that. I mean, what you mentioning there, Greg, like that happens so many times, especially in the healthcare space, right? Or between the payer and the provider space, where a lot of times the healthcare organization and the payers happen to be under the same parent companies. And there's supposed to be a firewall between the two for the kind of data sets, but they'll try to augment what they might not be able to technically get out of Epic with some of these other data sets. And you very, very quickly start falling into a really gray area. And I mean, it's almost impossible to try to prevent that.
Yep. It's one thing that I thought was interesting was when I was working with those HCUP data sets, the public data sets that are looking at clinical visit reporting data, an individual row would never go below the level of, I think it was 8 patients, so that the count was always 8 or higher. Because if you get at a count below 8, I think and I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I think there's data mining techniques you could use to start kind of piecing together who's who. And then maybe you find out that there's one person with a rare medical condition in a certain zip code, and then you're able to mine it down to that one person in that zip code. Then that would be a HIPAA violation, so to speak, even though you didn't have their name and address and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Data identification is really interesting stuff. I think you're talking about K anonymized, and in this case, K would be 8. But yeah, I think there's been a few breaches. I don't know if it was Connecticut or somewhere, where the governor's mansion has its own zip code, and it's the only person living there. And so they just released it at the zip code level, and guess what? Guess who that person is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really, it's a thing you have to be careful about.
Yeah, FERPA, which is, if you're probably familiar, but it's basically HIPAA for school systems. They recommend N of 20 or lower that you suppress that data. Same idea. Essentially, if you're breaking things down on a geomap, and you're visualizing results data for, let's say, developmental screening, and it reflects that there is an Asian student in that cell. If there's only one Asian student in that block, then you know who that person is and what the results were on their developmental screen, which is obviously massive violation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another anecdotal thing for this, Greg, you might know about this from the Microsoft side. So like back in I think it was like 2016, when a lot of the Azure ML stuff was really being promoted, there was these quick start things, and it was all the New York taxi cab data. And there's still a lot of quick start guides all over MSDN docs and stuff. But I remember reading some articles where people had taken that data, mined it, and they were like finding out interesting facts about famous people and their tipping habits for using New York taxi cabs, because they were able to basically do this, right? Be able to zoom down to a low count and low enough counts and get some pretty interesting facts out of there.
Yeah, that's where things start to get scary, because I can tell you from what I've seen on the kind of on my side of things is people are always looking for really good demos, and they'll just look for the best data set they can find, and they don't always think about the implications of what could somebody do with that data set, you know? And so they just go find, oh, it's like every, you know, we get all these great geolocation data about taxi cabs, but then they don't realize you could kind of reverse engineer that to, you know, do some very intrusive stuff, so to speak.
Cool. Yeah, this is really awesome. Very excited to see how this thing evolves.
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty early on. So, I mean, if somebody's looking to kind of, you know, people who are looking to get started and kind of learn, it might be a good place for them to start. But hopefully I can keep it going and keep building on it.
Cool. Just for everyone else's benefit, so we just recently, like within the last couple of weeks, created a brand new YouTube channel. So I'm finally starting to I will start getting into the habit of uploading this stuff, this content right away. So within the next couple of days or so, you should be able to see this out there. I'm going to paste the link to the YouTube channel again. So there's only a few people left on the call now, but I would definitely bookmark it and, you know, the usual, like the videos and subscribe and all that stuff. Cool. Any other last words from anyone before we call it for the day?
Thanks for letting me visit from Green Bay.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Yeah, and so for some of you new folks, so we are doing this. We changed stuff around. So now it is on the on the second Thursday of every month. We'll be having presentations. Next month, actually, we have a pretty interesting thing. I should just stop recording. This doesn't need to be in that.